I never thought my perfect life would shatter in a single evening. Standing in the shadows of my own living room, I watched the sunset paint golden streaks across our hardwood floors. The house was quiet, too quiet. I had told Sarah I was taking our kids, Emma and Lucas, to visit my parents for the weekend. But something in her voice during our last phone call had seemed off. The subtle excitement, the rushed goodbye, the way she insisted on knowing exactly when we'd leave. After 12 years of marriage, you learn to read between the lines. So here I was, waiting in darkness, my heart pounding against my ribs. The security camera notification had pinged my phone 15 minutes ago. Sarah's car pulling into our driveway. But she wasn't alone. James Parker sat in her passenger seat, his hand resting casually on her thigh. I'd suspected for months, but seeing it with my own eyes felt like a knife to the chest. The front door lock clicked, and I held my breath. Kids? Michael? Sarah's voice echoed through our home, our 15-year investment, our dream house in the suburbs of Boston. The silence that followed seemed to please her. I watched as she turned to James, her face lighting up with that smile that used to be mine. Empty, just as it should be, she whispered, pulling him inside. James stepped in, his expensive shoes clicking against our floor. He was everything I wasn't. Younger, flashier, with that startup entrepreneur swagger. This is going to be perfect, he said, wrapping his arms around my wife. My fingers tightened around the baseball bat I'd grabbed from our garage. Not to use it, I'm not that kind of man, but its solid weight kept me grounded. Sarah laughed, that musical sound I'd fallen in love with years ago. Let me just double check, she said, pulling out her phone. She dialed my number, and my silenced phone buzzed in my pocket. After a few rings, it went to voicemail. No answer, she announced triumphantly. He's probably busy with the kids. That's when I stepped out of the shadows. The look on their faces, I'll never forget it. Sarah's smile vanished, replaced by shock and horror. James stumbled backward, nearly knocking over our family photos. Michael, Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What? What are you doing here? I stayed calm, eerily calm. I think that's my question, Sarah. I replied, my voice steady despite the rage burning inside. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, the oldest line in the book. I walked to our mantel, where we kept our most precious possessions. The wooden box containing our wedding rings caught the last rays of sunlight. 12 years, I said, opening the box. 12 years, Sarah. James found his voice, though it shook. Listen, Michael, we can talk about this. Talk. I turned to face him. About how you're sleeping with my wife. Sarah stepped forward, her designer dress rustling. Michael, please. I pulled out the pliers I'd placed there earlier. Their eyes widened as I took out our wedding rings. Watch carefully, I said, placing my ring between the pliers' jaws. The metal bent with a satisfying crack. Sarah flinched at the sound. I dropped the mangled ring into the trash can. Your turn, I said, reaching for her ring. Michael, stop, she cried, but made no move to stop me. Another crack, another piece of our marriage destroyed. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. Sarah's shock turned to anger. You can't kick me out of my own house. Our house. I corrected her. The house I paid for while you were busy destroying our marriage. James tried to play peacemaker. Let's all calm down. Shut up, I snapped, turning to him. You don't get to speak in my house. I reached for the baseball bat. I won't ask again. Get out. Sarah's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, Michael. I'll take everything. The house, the kids, everything. James finally showed some sense, pulling her toward the door. We're leaving, he said. Come on, Sarah. They backed away, Sarah still spitting threats. The door slammed behind them, and I was alone. I sank into my favorite chair, the one where I used to read bedtime stories to our kids. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number. Richard, it's Michael Thompson. I need you to start divorce proceedings. Immediately. The next morning, I watched Sarah return with a police escort to collect her things. She wouldn't meet my eyes as she packed her clothes into expensive suitcases. The officers stood awkwardly in our foyer, called by her claims that I might become violent. They'd seen the security footage I'd saved. They knew the truth. I stayed in my home office, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered over the past months. Credit card statements showing dinners at high-end restaurants. Hotel receipts from business trips that never existed. Text messages I'd recovered from our shared cloud account. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies, of betrayal, of her playing happy family while sleeping with another man. When she finally left, I called our children. Emma, 14 and already too wise for her age, asked if Mom was coming back. Lucas, just 10, didn't understand why he couldn't talk to her right now. I promised them everything would be okay, even as my own heart broke. That night, I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at the divorce papers Richard had sent over. The terms were clear and harsh. I wanted full custody, the house, and most of our assets. Sarah had chosen her path. Now she would face the consequences. I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd always been stubborn, always needed to win. But I had something she didn't, the truth on my side. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and court filings. Sarah hired Jennifer Martinez, known for her aggressive approach to divorce cases. They painted me as controlling, manipulative, even threatening. The baseball bat became their prime example, twisted into a weapon of intimidation. But Richard was prepared. He had statements from our neighbors, friends, and colleagues, all testifying to my character, my dedication as a father. The financial records showing Sarah's betrayal were damning. She'd spent thousands of our family's money on James. Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, even helping with his rent. All while I worked 60-hour weeks building my business. The preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday morning. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one Sarah had always liked. The irony wasn't lost on me. The courthouse loomed before me, its stone steps well-worn by countless broken marriages. Inside, I saw her for the first time since that night. She sat with James and her lawyer, looking polished and determined. But I could see the cracks in her facade, the slight tremor in her hands as she shuffled papers, the way she wouldn't quite meet James's eyes. The hearing began, and our private life became public record. Every detail laid bare under fluorescent lights. Every betrayal examined and documented. Sarah's lawyer spoke of emotional abuse and control, of a wife desperate to escape an oppressive marriage. But when Richard presented the evidence, her story crumbled. The judge's eyes narrowed as he reviewed the financial records. The text messages between Sarah and James left little room for interpretation. By lunch break, even Jennifer Martinez looked worried. I stepped outside for air, watching other people's lives continue normally. A young couple walked past, holding hands and laughing. I remembered when Sarah and I were like that. Young, in love, believing our happiness would last forever. Now here we were, destroying each other in court. The afternoon session brought character witnesses. Our neighbors spoke of barbecues and block parties, of a family that seemed perfect from the outside. My business partner testified about my work ethic, my integrity. Sarah's face grew paler with each positive statement about me. The final blow came from Emma's video deposition. Our daughter, trying to be brave, describing the changes in her mother. The missed school events, the distracted conversations. The strange man who sometimes picked her up from soccer practice. When the judge called a recess, Sarah fled to the bathroom. I saw James follow her, his face tight with concern. But something had changed in the way he looked at her. The glamour of their affair was fading in the harsh light of reality. Richard patted my shoulder as we left the courthouse. "It's going well," he said. The judge sees through their story. I nodded, feeling hollow despite our apparent victory. This wasn't what I wanted, to destroy the mother of my children. But she'd left me in. Oh, choice. That night, I sat in Emma's room, helping with her homework. Lucas played video games down the hall, his laughter a balm to my soul. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, "are you and Mom ever getting back together?" I looked at my daughter, seeing Sarah's eyes in her face. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Sometimes things break and can't be fixed." She nodded, wiser than her years. "Is it because of James?" My heart clenched at her directness. "It's complicated," I answered. "But what matters is that we love you." She went back to her math problems, but I saw the tears she tried to hide. Later, lying in my bed, I thought about the future. The holidays split between homes. The awkward graduations and weddings to come. The grandchildren who would never know their grandparents as a unit. All because Sarah couldn't be content with what we had. All because she believed the grass was greener somewhere else. The next morning brought more court proceedings. More witnesses, more evidence, more pain laid bare. But something had changed in Sarah's demeanor. The fight was leaving her, reality setting in. I caught her watching me during a break. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd married. The one who'd promised to love me forever. Then James appeared at her side, and she turned away. But not before I saw the doubt in her eyes. The first part of our divorce battle was drawing to a close. The judge would make his preliminary rulings soon. Sarah's perfect plan was unraveling. And somewhere deep inside, past the anger and pain, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because sometimes justice comes naturally, like the changing of seasons, or the truth finally coming to light. I watched Sarah's world crumble during the second week of hearings. Her lawyer tried desperately to salvage their case, but the evidence kept mounting against her. James started missing court sessions. His absence spoke volumes to everyone in that courtroom. Sarah would glance at his empty seat, her confidence wavering. One morning, I overheard them arguing in the courthouse hallway. "You promised you'd be here," she hissed at him. "I have meetings, Sarah. I can't keep putting my life on hold." The irony wasn't lost on me. She destroyed our marriage for this man. Now he was showing his true colors. Richard brought in our financial advisor to testify. The numbers told a devastating story. Sarah had withdrawn over $50,000 in the past year. Most of it had gone to James's failing startup. "Mrs. Thompson," Richard asked, "did you consult your husband about these investments?" Sarah's face flushed as she answered, "No." The judge's pen scratched across his notepad. During breaks, I'd call home to check on the kids. Emma was struggling with her grades. Lucas had started having nightmares. Our nanny, Maria, was doing her best to keep things normal. But children always know when their world is breaking. One evening, I found Emma crying in her room. "Mom missed my piano recital," she sobbed. I held her close, feeling her tears soak my shirt. Sarah had been at dinner with James instead. The photos were already on social media. The next day in court, Richard presented Sarah's social media history. Pictures of her and James at expensive restaurants. Vacation snapshots from weekends I thought she was working. Comments and likes that painted a timeline of betrayal. Sarah's lawyer objected, calling it character assassination. The judge overruled her. These posts are relevant to establishing patterns of behavior. I watched Sarah sink lower in her chair. The confident woman who'd threatened to take everything was disappearing. During lunch break, James finally showed up. He looked different, nervous, distracted. I saw him pull Sarah aside, speaking in hushed tones. Her face went pale as he talked. When they returned, Sarah looked shell-shocked. Later that day, we learned why. James had been embezzling from his company. The SEC was investigating him. He needed money, lots of it, That's when Sarah realized she'd been played. All those investments in his startup, they'd gone straight to his pocket. The man she destroyed her marriage for was a fraud. Richard advised me to use this to our advantage. But watching Sarah's complete devastation felt hollow. That evening, I sat with Lucas while he did his homework. "Dad," he asked, "why did Mom's friend take her money?" Children hear everything, understand more than we think. "Sometimes people aren't who they seem to be," I answered carefully. He nodded, processing this truth about the adult world. "Is that why you're sad all the time?" His question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized my children could see through my brave face. "I'm sad about what happened," I admitted, "but I'm not sad all the time. I have you and Emma." He smiled, that innocent smile that made everything worthwhile. The next day, Sarah didn't show up to court. Her lawyer requested a continuance. "My client is experiencing severe emotional distress." The judge granted a 2-day recess. I spent those days focused on my children. We had dinner together, played board games, almost like normal, except for the empty chair at our table. On the third day, Sarah returned. She looked different, defeated. James was nowhere to be seen. Her lawyer approached Richard before proceedings began. They wanted to discuss a settlement. In the judge's chambers, Sarah spoke directly to me. "I'll accept your terms," she said quietly. "All of them. Just please don't keep me from the kids." I studied her face, the face I'd woken up to for 12 years. "I would never keep you from them," I replied. "They need their mother, even if she made mistakes." Tears rolled down her cheeks. For the first time since this began, they seemed genuine. The settlement was drafted quickly. I got primary custody, the house, my business. Sarah got reasonable visitation rights and a fair financial settlement. Less than she could have fought for, more than she deserved. That night, I told the children about the agreement. Emma asked if Mom would be at her next recital. "Yes," I promised. "She'll be there." Lucas wanted to know if this meant everyone would stop fighting. "The fighting is over," I assured him. Later, alone in my study, I looked at our wedding photo. We were so young, so sure of forever. I took it down from the wall but couldn't throw it away. Instead, I put it in a box in the attic. Some memories are too important to discard, even when they hurt. The next few weeks brought a new routine. Sarah would pick up the kids every other weekend. She'd moved into a small apartment across town. James had disappeared completely. Rumors said he'd fled to South America. The SEC was still looking for him. Sarah had lost everything she gambled for, but she was trying to rebuild. I saw it in the way she focused on the children, never missing a school event now, always on time for pickups and drop-offs. Small steps toward redemption. One Sunday evening, as she brought the kids home, she lingered at the door longer than usual. "Michael," she said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing what I had." I nodded, accepting her words but not inviting more. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But we could build new ones, different ones. For our children's sake. As spring turned to summer, life settled into its new pattern. The kids began to smile more often. The house felt less empty. And I learned that healing comes in unexpected ways. Like when Emma made honor roll, and both her parents sat together at the ceremony. Or when Lucas scored his first soccer goal, and we both cheered from opposite sides of the field. These moments reminded me that family, even broken and reassembled, is still family. Sarah never asked to reconcile. She knew that door was closed. Instead, she focused on being a better mother. It was the one thing she could still fix. And I found that forgiveness, while not erasing the past, makes the future easier to face. The divorce papers gathered dust in my desk drawer. Physical proof of our failure, but also of our survival. Life moved forward, as it always does, different from what we'd planned, but not without its own kind of peace. The children learned resilience. I learned strength. And Sarah, I hope, learned wisdom. Sometimes the hardest lessons leave the most lasting impact. And sometimes what feels like an ending is really just a different kind of beginning. The seasons changed, and our new normal settled in. 1 year after the divorce, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly reports. A notification popped up on my phone. Sarah was dating someone new. A mutual friend had sent me the information, worried about him. EDXtin. But I felt nothing except mild curiosity. The man was a high school teacher, stable and kind by all accounts. Different from James in every way possible. I hoped, for our children's sake, that she'd chosen better this time. Emma, now 15, was becoming quite the pianist. Her music filled the house on practice days. Sometimes, when she played certain pieces, I'd catch glimpses of Sarah in her expressions. The same intensity, the same passion. But Emma was stronger than her mother had been. More grounded, more aware of what matters. Lucas had joined a competitive soccer team. Sarah and I took turns driving him to practices. We'd nod to each other during handoffs. Civil, professional, parents but not partners. One Saturday morning, during Lucas's game, Sarah approached me with coffee in hand. "Peace offering," she said, extending a cup. I accepted it, remembering how she used to know my order by heart. She still did, apparently. "The kids seem happy," she observed carefully. "They're adjusting," I replied. We watched Lucas chase the ball across the field. "I met someone," she said finally. "I know," I responded, sipping my coffee. "His name is Daniel. He's different." I nodded, understanding what she meant. "No flas, no drama, no hidden agendas." "The kids should meet him," I said. "If it's serious." She looked surprised at my openness. "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot." We watched the rest of the game in comfortable silence. Later that week, Emma asked about Sarah's new boyfriend. "Are you okay with it, Dad?" I helped her with her calculus homework while considering. "Your mom deserves to be happy," I said finally. "And you deserve a mom who's happy." Emma studied me with those wise eyes of hers. "What about you? Don't you deserve to be happy too?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about dating since the divorce. My focus had been entirely on the children and work. But Emma's question lingered in my mind. That evening, I found myself looking at old photos. Not of Sarah and me, but of my life before her. The ambitious young man I'd been. The dreams I'd had, some realized, some forgotten. Maybe it was time to remember who that person was. The next day, my sister Jane called. She'd been my rock throughout the divorce. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said. "No blind dates." I protested automatically. "It's not a date. Just coffee with a friend." I thought about Emma's question, about happiness and second chances. "Okay," I said finally. "Just coffee." Her name was Rachel, a pediatric surgeon. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She had kind eyes and an easy laugh. No dramatic sparks, no instant connection. Just comfortable conversation between two adults. We talked about our careers, our families. She'd never been married to her work instead. But now she was ready for something more. As we talked, I felt something shift in see. Deme? Not love. It was too soon for that. But possibility. Hope, maybe. We agreed to meet again the following week. When I told the kids about Rachel, their reaction surprised me. Emma was cautiously supportive. Lucas asked if she liked soccer. They were more ready for this than I was. Sarah heard about Rachel through the kids. She sent me a text. "I'm glad you're moving forward." It felt sincere, without bitterness. We were both learning to let go. Rachel fit into our lives slowly, carefully. She understood the complexity of divorced families. Never pushed to replace Sarah. Never competed for the children's affection. She came to Emma's recitals, cheered at Lucas's games, built her own relationships with them, different but valuable in their own way. 2 years after the divorce, I stood in the audience at Emma's high school graduation. Sarah sat a few rows ahead with Daniel. Rachel beside me, holding my hand, Our daughter walked across the stage, head held high, future bright before her. Both her families cheering her on. It wasn't the life I'd planned, not the future I'd imagined when I first said, I do. But watching my daughter that day, I realized something important. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its greatest trials. The betrayal that broke my heart had also set me free, free to discover strength I didn't know I had, free to be a better father, free to find love again, differently this time, more mature, more measured, more real. Sarah and I would never be friends. Too much history, too much pain, but we'd found peace in our new roles. Co-parents, civil acquaintances, each building new lives, while honoring the family we'd once been. Lucas scored the winning goal at his championship game. Both his families celebrated together. Rachel and Daniel chatting easily on the sidelines. Sarah and I exchanging proud smiles across the field. This was our new normal. Not perfect, but perfectly ours. That night, as Rachel and I walked home, she asked if I had any regrets. I thought about the past few years. The pain, the growth, the healing. No, I said finally. No regrets. Because every step of that journey had led me exactly where I needed to be. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it gives us what we need instead. And in the end, that's enough. More than enough. And